So you're going to share your 3 words and introduce yourselves at the same time. Who's going first? Who's got the microphone?
Is it on? Yeah? Great. Hello everyone, my name is George. I am a transgender teacher of religious education at the school I attended as a child, and I'm a freelance consultant looking at how to make the church more inclusive for LGBT people. My 3 words were tough, ideal, and true. Did anyone have any of those?
You got prizes?
No, I haven't got prizes, but I can find some later. Yeah.
Thank you, George.
I'm Andrew Jackson, I'm Chief Executive of Pax Christi, and my 3 words were, I hope I spelled this right, tautology, true, question mark, and impossible. So
with Julian, and we got 2 trues. So true from you? No? Okay,
Katrina. I'm really sorry you've got me again.
we're not.
I think next year we'll have Rowan doing morning, noon, night and breakfast service. Sister of St. Joseph of Peace, Pax Christi chaplain, my words, prayer, nonviolence, community.
and the cook is actually sick as well, so Katrina's making lunch for everybody.
Morning everybody, my name is Wagani Chitsu, and I am a campaign officer at Operation Noah. I've got feedback, I've done something wrong, sorry. Okay. I also am an artist, so I practice, I have a studio in Hackney Wick and have shown all around the world, all around England and in Zimbabwe and Paris and New York.
And what were your 3 words?
My 3 words are healing and full of life, fullness of life. So I cheated a bit, sorry.
Very good. Thank you. So that worked. So we're going to carry on. That's the plan. So the first question to you all, and I'm going to skip you on this one. Katrina said to me this morning, as little as me as possible, but not none of her. She hates me already, it's fine. I've got more of these. The first question then is, I would like a little bit of your response to last night's dialogue. So last night, for those of you that weren't here, Rowan Williams wasn't either. And Sister Marianne, where are you, Marianne? Interviewed Katrina about gospel nonviolence. So Andrew, George, Bakani, what stood out for you from last night's discussions?
Okay, I'm happy to go first. I think for me it was actually it was both Marianne and Katrina. I think I said to Katrina beforehand, the gospel nonviolence is so in you and so part of you, and you live and breathe it, and that came across last night, and that's inspiring in itself. And the story of you kneeling and throwing paint over a placard inspires me as someone who would find that really difficult to do. So I thought, Marianne, I think you should be on the Today programme. So that was my reaction.
Very good, thank you.
Mine was, you mentioned kind of prayer and motivation, and we had I had a pause with when you gave us a couple of minutes to talk, and we were talking about, for me, I often just jump straight into action and think I'm only doing something good if I'm acting, without reflecting on kind of prayer or why that might be important. And I thought then, actually, in terms of motivation, I probably should think about prayer in times before I start that action, which was quite important for me, because I'm the other way around. So
I was struck by community. I've been bridesmaid about 13 times, so I'm trying to defriend people. But I thought about how fortunate I feel to have I think we hear a lot about loneliness. To have friends who make it easy to make choices and to live a life that I'm grateful for, that I'm proud of. And I think the reinforcement of that, the friends with whom I have so much fun, and we're not always earnest and wholesome, but we encourage each other, and I thought, that really struck me as important.
Thank you. So, I think for me that came away from it was thinking around privilege. So, Katrina, I'm going to just push you straight away just to see what happens. No violence, no violence. So, many years ago, I remember sitting with Pat Gaffney in a lovely Indian restaurant and kind of discerning whether or not I would be willing to get arrested at a protest. And kind of deciding at the time, I don't think I can, I've got all these responsibilities. And since then, it just feels like the responsibilities have grown. My children are over there. Hello, Grace and Sam. I'm married, I've got a job, etc., etc. And I'm thinking, you're there as a member of a religious community that will back you, that you've got kind of different responsibilities to me. Then I've got friends who are refugees and asylum seekers. The last time I was even close to arrest was when we were blockading people who were being deported for Rwanda. And I was kind of scurrying back and forward with water, giving it to the people who were locked on, but I was not. Every time the police said, out of the way, I went, yes. So their kind of lack of privilege and the risk for them, being people of colour and people who are kind of already at a situation of instability, insecurity and risk. What would you say, how would you nuance all of what you said last night, given these kind of different situations of privilege? Morning.
That's a huge question. A lot of you will remember Father David Stanley, who was at conference many times and was a great friend of Pax Christi. And I remember talking to him about why he risked arrest. And he said to me, this is the privilege of celibacy. This is the privilege of celibacy. For those of us called to religious life, it is a privilege, and we cannot squander that privilege. Particularly those of us who have British passports, who have white skin, who have supportive communities, not just religious communities, but wider communities. I don't think I can sit here and squander that. We all have one thing in common, every single thing. We all in this room have one thing in common, we will die. We will die. So what's the worst that can happen to me? What's the worst? Now, the draconian laws that are coming in are scary, absolutely scary. But there is a hierarchy of privilege. I'm very conscious of that, and having lived in a house of hospitality with refugees and asylum seekers with the Catholic worker, that's one of the things that push me to risk arrest, hearing their stories. So I think we each have to discern in our own hearts, and as I said last night, never alone, because for every one person that's arrested, we need a community around us, bringing us water, doing the social media, meeting us from the police station at 2 o'clock in the morning, because that's when they always release you, just as the tubes have closed. We need all that support too.
Thank you, Katrina. Bakani, I'm going to go to you. So last night, once we decided to ask you to be on the panel, I did some kind of manic Googling, and I discovered that you had an exhibition called, you're going to like this, Reconciliation, the Unfinished Business of Liberation. Doesn't that sound good? An art exhibition, Reconciliation, the Unfinished Business of Liberation. Could you tell us a bit more about that, and what does that have to do with the theme of this conference, Just Peace?
Sure. So I had the exhibition in 2022, and it was my first solo in London for about 7 years, and it was in a chapel, And I was born in Zimbabwe. We came to the UK when I was 13. And my generation is often referred to as the born frees, because we were born after independence in Zimbabwe in 1980. That gives you my age. And I'd thought a lot about how with this freedom we allegedly got, it didn't feel like a full freedom. And especially after 2020 and witnessing some of the protests that followed George Floyd's murder, it really felt like all these different injustices were deeply connected. We all heard about Black Lives Matter at the time, and it struck me that I, growing up in Zimbabwe, having survived the AIDS epidemic then, the same issues were still at play. The empire, British Empire, politically may have ended in Zimbabwe, but economically that was still the case. So reconciliation struck me as something that was important. The exhibition was in a chapel because the church had been involved in the colonial project. And I'm Catholic because Jesuits came to Zimbabwe first, and I was educated. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, very, very Catholic. We all have a saint's name. My parents were named in Latin. And I really wanted to think about, what does reconciliation mean without repentance? What does the seeking for absolution without repentance mean? And that's what I saw a lot of in 2020, that there was a lot of wanting to acknowledge history and the present, but without wanting to change, and that's what repentance and reconciliation meant for me. So all of that felt like unfinished business, and I live in London, I live in the heart of where this all started, and I wanted to present works that were challenging. Some of them were stained glass pieces, they were on mirrors, so I wanted people to see themselves within the context of this story, and not just say, oh well, that's her over there, that's her experience, but to say, no, you're part of this. And a motif that ran around the whole exhibition in text in the paintings was, we are the ones we've been waiting for. So this idea that we're always waiting for a liberatory savior, a hero, but to say, actually, it's up to us. And, you know, to something that we heard yesterday, that change, that liberation has to start from me. I also have to be freed from some of my own colonial mindsets. And only from then can I start to be reconciled with being both Zimbabwean and British, being African in a European capital, my ways in which I'm complicit. So those were many of the themes that came up, and part of my work in climate justice is about that restorative, to say, well, if maybe my presence in that room is to say, this is ongoing, this has not ended, and I think God always leaves witnesses, and in order to have peace, there's always those who can remember what happened, and to that point of never again, I don't feel survivor's guilt so much as I'm here to remember and to remind, and as an artist, to transform trauma so that I'm not transmitting it to the next generation.
Thank you. I thought there was going to be a spontaneous round of applause. When you have to ask for it. I thought that was brilliant. In particular, the kind of reconciliation without repentance and the kind of need for change rings true. Do you remember the question that came from that side of the room yesterday? I couldn't see who it was, I was over there. About peace without justice, and kind of almost being a meaningless word. It reminded me, you mentioned Dorothy Day yesterday. Dorothy Day said something along the lines of charity being a word to choke over. With charity without justice, it feels to me that there's something that needs to underpin all of this. So I heard a lot of that, but it was interesting that you were bringing it back to yourself, rather than saying, you know, you lot need to do the reparation, you lot need to pay back, you need to change. You were also saying, and so do I, which is a challenging reflection. George, let me go to you. A question from someone in the LGBT community and a Catholic. How on earth do I make peace with a church that rejects me?
I have seen the question before, but that is still tough. For me, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about this later as well, you have to approach situations with, I guess, an essence of forgiveness. People don't always make the right choice. There's a common phrase, as an LGBT Christian, there's a common phrase, you don't need to worship somewhere that you're not wanted. And there will be parishes, unfortunately, that don't want you. And that is challenging. But there are communities that you can join. So LGBT Catholics Westminster, there's Quest. I think it's important to recognise where the church is. I'm a huge fan of Pope Francis, God rest his soul. But he has moved the church forward in terms of pastoral accompaniment. So I think we have to enter situations with an air of grace, respect for where people are coming from, but the opportunity, it shouldn't be on you to make that place welcoming for you. So if it's not, you have to find somewhere new, and there are places to go. But I think we have to enter into a dialogue. It's bridge building from both sides. I see as a teacher, lots of young people are very anti-religion because they feel it's anti their friends who are LGBT. So there's definitely a process for dialogue, but I would also say you can't be somewhere that you're not wanted. That's not good for you, especially if you are vulnerable, you've just come out. Is that?
It's beginning, but I want more. So like one of my greatest shames, I suppose, ever. I was in a parish in London, and I was actually in the music group, and there was a visiting priest who stood up and said some horrific homophobic things, and I didn't stand up and walk out. And I forever, I'm getting emotional even naming it, I forever regret not getting up in that moment. So we are in a church where there is all sorts of stuff. Like I know there's a conference happening this weekend where I looked at the list of speakers and I thought, yeah. So how to make peace with that? Like, because I think it comes back to this concept of justice. Like if there isn't a movement for change, if there isn't something, then can you make peace with it? Or is it the peace as a word to be choked over?
I don't think we're at a place where you can get to peace with it at the minute, and I think that's tricky, and I don't think that you should feel bad that you didn't stand up in that moment, because it's very difficult to do. It's kind of like what you were saying before, that sometimes you have responsibilities, or sometimes you're not confident enough to get up and do it, but it doesn't mean you're not thinking about it. You're still thinking about it. And, if you'd have walked out, would it have made a difference? To you, it might have done, but to everyone else, they might not have seen it. And I think that just walking out doesn't necessarily mean you're dealing with the issue. It shows that you're unhappy with what's being said. But other people may not, like I said, other people may not have seen that actually there's still a conversation to have afterwards, and say, actually, why have you said those things? You have to, for me, the LGBT thing, you have to enter this at the very beginning, that there are some people that are completely anti any type of inclusion, and you walking out would stop a conversation. And people make mistakes or they make bad choices, but you forgive that. It's not a problem that you didn't walk out, in my mind. It's important that you're still thinking about that and you're thinking about how to make change and make something better for someone. So I think we have to enter dialogue, and I think we have to probably start at the very beginning. Kind of, for me, what's really important, and this came across in what you were saying yesterday, the individual stories of change are really, really important. So when you said that the guy kind of came over your shoulder and whispered, you know, I fear that I'm right, that you're... yeah, that would be awkward, wouldn't it? That wouldn't be so powerful as a story. Yeah, but I think that's the important thing. You know, you're not gonna. You walking out at that time wouldn't change the minds of everyone in that room. It wouldn't change the mind of the person that's preaching. But when you enter into dialogue, you're consistently kind of present. You talk about these things. That's when you start to realise that there could be a change. When you meet the real people that are affected by the words that you're saying. So listening to the stories, I think, of LGBT people is really important if you want to change the parish that you're in, or the school, or wherever you are.
Yeah, I'm hearing a kind of recurring... Waiting for a second. So I'm hearing this kind of journey to justice, which then gets us to peace, that it isn't as simple as just kind of, we impose peace, bang. There's a kind of journey, there's all sorts of justice things underneath. Andrew, we're going to come to you. So we did quite a lot of preparation for this. I spoke to these people, apart from Paul McCartney, you got 5 minutes yesterday. On our Zoom calls, I was struck with how much you were kind of quoting Catholic theologians, but at the same time reminding me that you weren't Catholic. And you even used the words, I've got a bit of imposter syndrome, James. So what do you kind of see as these treasures within the Catholic community that perhaps we need to hear about, and how do they fit into your journey?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome sitting here this morning. So I think, yeah, when I said that, so my journey to Pax Christi perhaps explains it best. So I was director of CHIPS, and the CHIPS team are here this weekend, fantastic. So definitely go to the workshop and go and see them on the stall, because the work is fantastic. And I was sitting there, I was working there, and personally I was going through a bit of a spiritual journey, starting to explore Catholicism. And Katrina mentioned Thomas Merton yesterday, and I'd read Seven Storey Mountain, and it had a profound impact on me. I was reading Henry Nouwen, I was exploring Dorothy Day, and I was sitting there thinking, all the stuff I'm reading about peace and justice is from Catholic writers. And there's some deep thought here, there's some deep theology, and some real radical teaching, and it appealed to me. And one way, when the role at Pax Christi came up, I applied for it because of that. So yeah, it's, I feel like the newbie in terms of non-violence as well, right at the beginning of a journey, surrounded by people who've been living it for a long time. And it is deeply encouraging and, as I said, inspiring to me. There's something holistic about it, there's a deep spirituality about it, and like listening last night, I'm re-inspired again. But yeah, aware that, as I said, that I'm a newbie and right at the outset of this.
I think we value kind of your pointing those things out, because to say that, you know, it's Catholic theology, how many of us have actually heard it? There's a limit to. Lots of people, I believe, have come to you, Katrina, and said, I've not heard that, that was new. Like, there's definitely, we are all on that journey, I suppose is what I want to say. The other thing that struck me from what Katrina said, that I wanted to come back to you, was you spoke about valuing the Pax Christi liturgical calendar. Could you say something about that, Andrew? What does that mean to Pax Christi?
Yeah, so I don't know whether it's by design or not, but we have a pattern of events and activities throughout the year. So obviously Peace Sunday, and I'm sure everybody in this room in your parish, you're going to mark Peace Sunday, second Sunday of Ordinary Time 2026 come to the stall and we'll take the name address.
Oh, it says ask Andrew to advertise. Yeah, yeah, that's good.
Really important day, and we're talking about privilege. It's a real privilege for us in this country that we have a Sunday on which we mark the global day, World Day of Peace on the 1st of January. So that's the advert done. So we have Peace Sunday, then we'll have Ash Wednesday, we have Global Days of Action on Military Spending, Conscientious Objectors Day. So we have these dates through the year that give a focus to the work and give opportunities as well to campaign, to do active non-violence and prayer. So I think that's what you were talking through, wasn't it? And sometimes it fits with the church calendar, so Advent, Ash Wednesday, obviously, and so on. So it gives a framework.
Yeah.
I think.
And there's something very so valuable about having kind of touch points to kind of keep coming back to things. All right, the next question is going to be for all of you, and it's an excuse for me to do my new favourite joke. So the question is going to be, if you were in a lift with Donald Trump and or Keir Starmer, you can choose. But Donald Trump is in Scotland at the moment, I believe. But that's why Scottish contingent said that's why we're here. Which actually, when I mentioned this question to Bakani, she said I'd be clawing to get out. But the question is, what would you say to him? But the joke, see the dove? Why is Donald Trump scared of doves? He's scared they're going to stage a coup. Thank you. One person laughing. Thank you. So you are trapped in a lift with someone with influence, someone with power, a political leader. What is it that you would like to say to them? If you're ready.
So if it was Donald Trump, I'd say, will you just stop lying? Yeah, that would be, I'd just beg him to stop lying. And then to Keir Starmer, I'd say, this is really, really easy. Here's a few steps you need to take and you're sorted. So ban Israel from the DSEI arms fair, stop supplying the arms, acknowledge that you have done, stop the surveillance flights, and you'll make a lot of people very happy and you'll go up in their estimation.
Right, round of applause. Who's next?
Yeah, imagine being stuck in a lift with Keir Starmer. You know, yeah, this is really tough. You know, what would I say to him? We have a Labour Prime Minister. A lot of people in this room will have campaigned over the past decades to get Labour governments. I think I would say to our Prime Minister, I believe that in 1996, you represented some friends of mine in court who had done a Seeds of Hope ploughshares action and had thrown red paint over planes. The planes going to East Timor. They were arrested. You represented them in court. You were on the side of non-violence and justice. Now, some other friends recently did something very similar. You've now labelled them terrorists. Can you explain that?
Wow, great answer. And for those of you that don't know, the Sisters of St Joseph of Peace have all their shares in red paint, which is why she keeps mentioning that. Anyway, Bakani?
That's where I stockpile all my paints from. I interned in politics as a student, as my undergrad was in politics with economics, and I remember meeting Tony Blair for the first time, and I'd turned down that internship, number 10, because of the Iraq War, and my family were like, are you insane? And I didn't know the phrase conscientious objector at the time, and I was, 19, and I thought, well, I'll never get to meet the Prime Minister and Bill Clinton, I better take this opportunity. I now realize that actually power lies in the people that I meet every day. I have faith in your abilities more than I have faith in a Donald Trump, because they eventually have to listen to people like us. I grew up in a family that had, my grandmother was arrested 3 times for harboring terrorists in Zimbabwe. What, uncle? I'm like, maybe, yeah, he should have been arrested. But like, when you think about fighting for liberation and those examples, I recognized that what we thought was possible could only be made possible by powerful people, and my internships was really realizing that actually they are part of machines, they are part of institutions and organizations, and those big ships can be turned by little tugboats, and the work that we do can be those tugboats. I think for Trump, he's an ego guy, it seems to me, so I would perhaps appeal to him by suggesting that if he really does want a Nobel Peace Prize, there are ways you can get those by doing really radical acts, like not selling weapons to certain countries, but defunding military altogether. There have been such extraordinary examples of taking society forward by how we direct funds and how we direct money in our lifetimes, in 2 generations' lifetimes. So we know what's possible, and I think Keir Starmer shows me a deep insecurity, somebody who doesn't know what they're capable of and what support they might have if they listen to their better instincts. I think there's a lot of cowardice that I see in him, and I think actually you meet that cowardice by showing somebody that they could be great and allowing them to live in that vision of themselves potentially.
I'm so glad you joined the panel. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you, Wakani.
They're really hard acts to follow, aren't they? You're all very polite, because I'd probably use an expletive if I saw certainly Donald Trump in a lift. I'd probably pretend to ignore him if I'm going to be like, oh, do you come here often? Like, I have no idea who you are. Like, your hair's very interesting though, how do you do that? If I was going to ask them a question, which I'm not 100% convinced I would, because I couldn't take the answers, I don't think, with good grace. I couldn't be non-violent in that situation. I'd ask why they're so intent on harming people generally, but why they're so intent on harming people in particular that are vulnerable, and why they support that action. But I'd expect a very typical, one of those kind of, well, we're doing it because, this is my Keir Starmer impression, we're doing it because, and I think I'd probably just be like, oh God, get me out of this lift, please. So I would just ask that, why are you so intent on harming people?
And one final question before we open things up. A very personal one, I suppose, is around hypocrisy and balancing hypocrisy. So I'm conscious that I'm very privileged. Like, lots of people have congratulated me on my doctorate because it's on the badge for the first time, I don't know why. But I've almost forgotten the whole PhD. It was years ago, it's before the children, so it's kind of a doorstop in the house. But obviously I've had lots of education, I've kind of grown up in this country, I've had all sorts of different experiences, I'm employed to work in this movement, privileged to have this wonderful job with the Colombians, and yet I get it wrong all the time. So obvious examples to me is I have a car, like I have a car, it is doing violence to creation. I have booked some flights to the Philippines with the kids. And last time I spoke to Katrina about this, she told me off. But I've done it anyway because I want the kids to have that experience. And really, honestly, I've been turning a blind eye to some of the stories in the news at the moment just because I'm finding them overwhelming and difficult. And I know I've got various other, I'm working on biodiversity for the Clumbans, I'm working on refugees for the Clumbans, and therefore I'm not working on some other things. What privilege, what hypocrisy, what reality, to be honest. But how do you, the four of you, balance those hypocrisies in your lives? How do you manage the things that you can't do and accept that, and not let the guilt or the kind of multiple vocational calls that are out there in the world overwhelm you? They didn't know that question was coming, that's why they're all looking a bit nervous.
Now I feel guilty. For me, I focus on one particular area, so I focus on LGBT inclusion. And I'm aware that there are other things that happen. I'm aware also, and I think this is credit to your CV and what you just said, when you're seen to be someone who's moving in this field, you get given everything. And so for me, it was like, okay, you're LGBT and you're being nice about that. Why don't you take on diversity and inclusion in total? I did, I was silly, I took it. But I'm not the expert in every field. And I'm human, and you can only do what you can. And I think you unfortunately, you have to accept that there is a limit to what you can do as a human person. You can try, you can talk to people, you can get other people involved, but you as an individual have to recognise that as well as being an education worker, you're also a father, a husband.
I love the way this has turned into a James counselling.
It literally has, isn't it? It's only £60 an hour, James. But I recognise I'm a son. I'm someone who helps my parents because they're ill. So if that means I can't do something one weekend, so be it. But we have to accept and recognise that we are also worthy of the dignity that we're trying to afford other people. And that might mean, unfortunately, you can't do everything you want to do.
Yeah, I think much the same, to be honest. I remember when I was leading a team of debt counsellors when I worked for Christian Against Poverty, we used to make the team repeat every now and again, I am not the Messiah. Because, and neither was I, as it happened, because we were constantly overstretching ourselves and wanting to help absolutely everybody who walked through the door, even when we couldn't. So, yeah, you're right. It's about recognising that you can't do everything, and probably discerning what it is that you are being called to do in some way. I remember my daughter when she was a teenager. I had to say to her, "You can't fight every battle, and it's not your role to fight every battle." Although she really, really wanted to. Yeah, having grace towards ourselves, as George said. I think look at this a bit this afternoon in the workshop around how we sometimes do violence to ourselves, and part of not doing violence to ourselves is recognising our boundaries and our limits and having grace towards ourselves. So that would be my response.
Yeah, I'd really echo that thing of we're not the Messiah. But we each have something to do. And I really believe that thing I said last night of what breaks my heart, what breaks your heart, and just focus on that. Because it'll be a huge area. If you choose poverty, mental health, the arms trade, they're huge areas. And then you've all got family, friends, communities, your own well-being. And I always remember as well, Jesus spent a lot of time with his friends. I think, was it last Sunday's Gospel, he was having dinner with Mary and Martha. And those friendships, if they offer us a spiritual dimension, that is such a blessing. That is such treasure. And I think to spend time with our friends, to do the things that energize us, find that thing. Because otherwise you can't run on empty, you really can't. But again, I come back to community, because it's how do we keep that balance in a world that tells us, oh, you're worth it. So yeah, just don't look at the news and don't engage. So we have to keep that balance. And I think we do that by having wise counsel around us.
I often say that I don't go camping because I didn't leave Africa to come here and camp. So, and this is, like, I look at saints that I really admire and I'm like, I could not be in the desert eating herbs and locusts. Like, I'm not built, God didn't design me for suffering per se. It doesn't mean that I'm not strong and I can go through things. But I think God gives us a beautiful world and surrounds us with so much abundance, and it's so generously and lovingly given that I think guilt can be quite a paralyzing thing. I didn't choose to be in the UK. I live an extraordinarily privileged life, especially if you look at me circa 9 years old, like no parents in Zimbabwe, like to be adopted in my family, educated, to live and meet incredible people. That's been all gift. And it's not to say those gifts haven't come at a cost, to my family who've had to take on, an extra child to look after and work extra shifts. I was brought up by my aunt who's a nurse. And for a while, I felt really burdened by that gift, right? To say, oh my God, what have I done to deserve this? I have to live how she might want me to live. But God has always given freely, and so has she. So I think a big part is to enjoy the beauty that we're given. That's why I'm an artist. And sometimes being an abstract artist can seem like, there's a lot going on in the world and you're making pretty colors. It can feel really self-indulgent, but it reminds me of the beauty that God gives us, and that to honor that and to be grateful for it means that actually we can compare and contrast it with the things that we don't necessarily need. I'm trying to fly less, but I have a friend's wedding and my family is not in this country. So I'm trying to reduce, and often you think, oh, reducing means less or lack. I have a really bad Vinted addiction because I don't want to buy from High Street, but I found the most fabulous things and I still enjoy beauty, and it doesn't do the harm that I might otherwise do if I was shopping on the High Street. So where I can, I avoid harm and actually find that it makes my life better. I think often we think, I think your kids would have a wonderful experience in Bournemouth as well as in the Philippines. Like, we live in one of the most international countries in the world where you can experience culture, you can experience nature and all sorts of wonderful things. But the way that I deal with it is to appreciate the enormity of what I have, and to recognize whilst we are the ones we're waiting for, it's not just up to me as an individual, and as you said, community, and to enjoy it. Like, came for a fullness of life. So.
Thank you so much. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, the idea is we're going to take 2 or 3, see how it goes, and then ask for the panel to respond. And I'm going to try and make sure that it doesn't come back to me. Let's see how this goes. So we have Raymond and a lady at the back there. Those 2 first, please.
Hi.
Oh, I've been asked to say, please could you say who you are, and if you're representing an organisation, could you name them too? And then Paul said, so we know who to sue. So I think that bit was a joke. Yes.
Hi, my name's Val Bowen. I work for Tyne West Citizens, and I live equal distance between Sunderland and Durham.
Excellent.
So Sunderland, we had violence on the street last year, and we're likely to have it again this year. There's real polarisation and tension. Durham, we just had a reform council. So there's real polarisation in my community and violence. And I haven't heard a lot of talk about how we respond to the violence on our streets. So my question to the panel is, what would you be saying for our congregations at Peace Sunday, for example? How do we respond to the local violence and polarisations?
Brilliant, thank you. And Raymond, do you have to name 2 cities that you live equidistant between if you want to ask a question? No, you don't.
That's far too difficult. Good morning, thank you panel for a wonderful morning, really powerful and inspiring. My question is actually about the inner realm. Because one of the things I detect running through everything perhaps and underlying everything is about inner conversion. And I'd welcome the panel just to reflect a bit more on metanoia, inner conversion, prayer, bearing good fruit, through repentance. What is it? Well, I think we often race past it in the church, into the public square, into the noise, into the clashing cymbals. So I just want to take us back to that and invite you to share some reflections on inner conversion and why perhaps that's where we should start.
And would you like to name your organisation?
I beg your pardon, thank you, James. Caritas Social Action Network.
Thank you. Can we have another couple of hands? Or have we got someone else who wants to make a point or ask a question? There's one there, please. Thank you. And then one at the back. We'll have those 2 before we move to the panel.
Maybe linked to the Peace Sunday opportunity. I wonder what the panel would say. Let's say I was to be an ordinary, well-meaning, naive Catholic who says, well, I think war is inevitable. I think, despite the best will in the world, violence has always happened. Where would you start with a sincere Catholic like me, who happens to be ignorant, who thinks violence is inevitable? What would you start?
Thank you. And then there was one more. There was a hand there I spotted. Where's it gone? There it is. Brilliant. Thank you.
Barbara Eklund, Green Christian. I'm very pleased that there's been a lot of interconnections of the different issues around this topic, bringing in both peace, justice, the environment, obviously Green Christian. It's often, and I'm also struck by what you say, we can't do everything. One organisation has in a way to focus on their main focus. But I do think it's important that we should all of our different aspects of this issue should be very much aware of all the interconnections. And when you have a war, it's not just that people have fallen out with each other, it's that the land's gone dry, people have moved, there's pressures in the environment. We've got all the storms that are coming towards us as climate change hits more difficultly, and that's going to lead to more violence. So I guess my question is, how can we, without putting too much pressure on our own individual organisation, manage to somehow reflect the wide range of issues that go towards producing violence, and therefore the issues we need to address in order to find just peace?
Yeah, thank you. And while you were speaking, do you remember me failing to walk out of the priests and saying homophobic things? My kids just walked out, so they I don't know what to make of that. And my parents, yeah. So, well, best behaviour over. So, panel, we have a number of things that have come up already. So, there's something about the local stuff, local violence and polarisation. What would we say to local communities? We have a question about our inner conversion and our inner prayer life and how that relates. Where to start with the phrase "war is inevitable" from a well-meaning Catholic, and something around the kind of joining upness of it all and what's the responsibility on us to kind of recognise and work within that interconnectedness. So, who's starting? Who's got the microphone? Who would like to begin? To respond to some or all of those points, as you wish.
Can I just want to make a very brief comment on conversion, because I think others will be better at talking to that, and then talk about the local issue. So On conversion, in like Protestant evangelical circles where I come from, you often used to have Wesley quoted, who said, you had your initial conversion and then you had a conversion of the wallet. And so to me, I think I feel the same around non-violence. That there's there shouldn't be, but there's possibly a second conversion required. It's not a Damascus Road type conversion. You don't suddenly see a blinding light and suddenly you're a non-violent person. It's more progressive than that. But yeah, I would agree that a conversion is needed. And that partly feeds into the violence is inevitable question, because I think I would say, yes, at the moment, violence is inevitable and war is inevitable. History shows that, but we have a message of a different way. And we are, just as we're preaching the good news means preaching the message of peace and non-violence, and that our human relationships don't have to be the way that they are. So I'll stop there and let somebody else answer the question.
Yeah, within that, I'd say there's ecological conversion as well. If we're talking conversions, and the ecological conversion.
Yes.
Who would like to speak next? Connie?
I was thinking about the first question and about the communities where there's polarization. I don't know whether speakers. Okay. Last year in the August race riots, I remember talking to some friends and saying, I was so glad that I could work from home because I didn't necessarily feel super safe going out in the streets, and I live in East London. I'd have been fine. But 2 weeks ago, there were race protests outside immigration hotel not far from where I live in East London and in Canary Wharf. And my response last year was one of fear, but I felt safe at home, which I think is interesting because I live in a multiracial household. And I've been thinking a lot about, maybe reading Hannah Arendt last summer was not the best thing because it felt all extremely familiar to what's happening now. And I wondered, when people say, oh, I would never have behaved like that in the 30s. Well, how you're behaving now suggests how you might have behaved then. So a big part for me has been to start to lean into community, not just to take, but to give. So I'm trying to do more hosting. I'm going along to learning circles with Black Lives Matter, for example. I go on vigils, even though I don't always feel confident and comfortable being in street protests. I'm taking part in my church because it's much harder to hate anybody from up close. And I think what the internet does is to separate us and isolate us. And that isolation is very dangerous. So I think my recommendation would be to find ways to host, find ways to serve, and I think that heals community in a way that is really important because we start to see the world on our doorsteps and not necessarily think about war as something far, far away. I'm not good at succinct, sorry. In a conversion, I try and take a silent retreat every year. That's a great privilege. But it turns out I really like myself, so being in silence is fun. And maybe I can hear God speak more clearly than I might in busy London. So finding spaces of quiet and repose, even in a park, on a weekday or something, I find really helpful. Each organization, Operation Noah specifically works on campaigning and on climate finance, and specifically, it's so niche, within churches, we try and convert how churches act. And sometimes I feel, are we doing enough on racial climate justice? Because we know who's suffering a lot from this, and it becomes a real sense of unease within me of, am I doing enough for people who look like me, who are not often at climate marches for very understandable reasons. And part of that leaning into community has been to go and find those who are working in those spaces and support them the way I can, because I've learned a lot from campaigning at Operation Noah. And so collaboration between organizations and in communities, yeah, it just comes back to community, I think.
2 minutes left, so any final words from anybody?
Okay, in terms of violence in our own communities, I think Pope Francis, when he talked about the culture of encounter, that we need to get out of our comfort zones, folks. We need to go out. We can't expect people to be coming to us. We need to go to those places that make us really uncomfortable. I really wanted to do a little exercise. I'm going to do it. I don't care. We've only got 2 minutes.
1 minute and a half.
Okay, can you all stand up?
If you can.
If you can, and if you're willing. So, Andrew just said, shall we do the Pax Christi photo now? That is not my goal. To this question of should we arm Ukraine, should we arm Israel, should we arm whoever, they need our money, our weapons, but they need people. War doesn't happen without people. So can you please sit down if you're 17 or under? Oh, nobody, surprise. Could you please sit down if you're 81 or over? Oh, a few who are 81 or over. Could you please sit down if you're 71 or over? Oh, we're going down thick and fast. Could you please sit down if you're 61 or over? Ooh. Could you please sit down if you're 51 or over? Now, surprise, surprise, I should be sitting. Can you believe that? Yeah, you can. Could you please sit down if you're 41 or over? If we go to war, these are the people we send to the front line. These are the people you say we want to fight our wars. Your sons, your daughters. This is the choice we have. Every Ash Wednesday when we go and ask for repentance, a question is posed. Choose life or choose death.
I'm afraid we are out of time. Please could you thank the panel?